Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back once again with Rod Giltaca from the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. This is part 3 in our video series on comprehensive firearms training. So today we're going to be learning about stress, because it doesn't matter if you're a world-class marksman. If you buckle under pressure, you're not going to be able to hit on target. So what are we going to be talking about today, Rod?
We're going to be talking about stress management and stress response. So a lot of things happen when you're under pressure, whether you're standing on the line with a bunch of other shooters and a very high-end instructor instructing you, or you're just trying to achieve something you haven't achieved before. You're going to end up being under stress. So the way that you manage that stress is really important. So we're going to look at what causes stress, the response that your body has to stress, and ways that we can overcome it. Now, the first thing that we have to understand about stress is there are two regions of everyone's brain that we all have in common. We have an area called the forebrain, and we have an area called the midbrain, or the mammalian brain. So the forebrain is what handles most of our higher level thinking, our logic, a lot of our personality. And the midbrain is a different region of the brain that activates under extreme stress, so survival stress or even performance anxiety. Now, that midbrain is the part that you have in common with your dog, and that controls your fight or flight responses. It controls a lot of things that can cause you some issues. Now, those regions of the brain correspond to, they're almost like two nervous systems in our body that are laid on top of each other. There's the parasympathetic nervous system and there's the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part of your nervous system that deals with digestion, peristalsis, right? That's the rhythmic muscles that help you when you eat, get food down your throat, bowel and bladder control, things like that. Basically, it's the maintenance crew. It's the things that happen to you every day, just your normal day-to-day. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is very different. The previous one is connected to your forebrain, right? Your rational side. The sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. What happens is when you experience it, and we're going to just talk about extremes here so we can understand the concept. So if something happens to you, you know, your car stalls on the train tracks and there's a train coming and the gates are coming down, you're going to have a situation where your sympathetic nervous system is going to start overriding everything else. That means your forebrain shuts down, your midbrain takes over. And what happens there has a lot to do with your ability to stay calm in critical situations, and it also has a lot to do with previous training. So when it comes to firearms, in that context, we want to induce as much stress so you become inoculated to these stressful situations as we can, obviously while being safe on the range, so that should you ever have to perform at a competition or any other scenario and there's stress there, that you'll be able to overcome the physiological and the psychological effects of it. Now, here's what's important. When you experience a stressful situation, and again, we're going to just talk about extremes, so extreme survival stress, a lot of things are going to happen. And we're going to discuss this scale that was created by Siddle and Grossman, Grossman being Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who I've learned a lot of this stuff from, and he's an authority on stress response. So if we look at this chart, down here at the bottom, we have a condition called condition white. And this is when our heart rate is at its resting point. It's also known as homeostasis. So this is us just, you know, walking back and forth to the computer and getting a cup of water. When a critical situation happens, you can end up in these other four conditions, and they're conditions yellow through condition black. Where you end up when you have a stress response has everything to do with your prior amount of training, both psychological training and physical training, and your personality. When we use training and we ramp up the training with a lot of different things, loading up that intellectual bandwidth, if you remember from the previous video, this is what will prepare you to respond the way that you really want to in a stressful situation. All right, so we're cruising around in homeostasis, otherwise known as condition white. Then something really bad happens, right? Your car stalls on the train tracks, or rabid dogs running at you, or what have you. What'll happen is most people will run all the way to the far end of that scale, so condition red or condition black. And the kinds of things that happen to you will reduce your effectiveness in any situation. You'll lose all your fine motor skills. You won't be able to dial 911 under extreme survival stress because your fingers won't work. all your big muscles will still work, right? Your charging, thrashing muscles, stuff like that, running away from a threat, that'll still all work. In fact, they'll be optimized in condition red or black, but those fine motor skills will be gone. You'll also hyper-focus, you'll have tunnel vision. So if it's a vicious dog, you'll be hyper-focused on the dog. There could be other dogs around, you won't see them. You'll end up with tunnel vision, you'll lose your peripheral vision. In addition to that, you may void your bladder or bowels. That happens, like in combat. Some people think 30% of soldiers that are engaged in extreme combat will lose their bladder or bowels during that event. So I think all that to say, heading right to condition black is bad with prior training. When a critical situation occurs, you can end up somewhere around condition gray or condition red. And ideally, that's where you want to be. You want to have your heart pumping at a reasonable rate. You want to have blood moving to all your muscles. You're going to have increased cognitive reaction time. There's going to be a lot of good things that are going to happen to you. You're ready to perform whatever it is you're doing without losing total control of your forebrain and having the midbrain and your sympathetic nervous system completely take over. How we're doing that on the range is we can only simulate so much stress here, but we're going to simulate stress by creating goals. So 0 misses, let's say, and start throwing a lot of things like threat identification, moving and shooting, different commands, me trying to trick Nate. So to inoculate ourselves against all of this stress that we're trying to induce artificially at the range, we're going to be going through some of the techniques in this video and throughout the entire series that are all going to answer to that. So now the stress response itself comes on fast. Do you know how fast?
Probably within a few fractions of a second, I'm
Yeah,
presuming.
probably between 1 and 2 seconds, basically 2 heartbeats. When you get an adrenaline dump, and you're also going to have cortisol, there's a lot of hormones that are going to activate when you are in some kind of extreme survival stress situation. It takes no time at all for your heart to go from resting, so for me it's about 65, to 200. It happens like that. Again, try to simulate all this stuff to make sure that when stress shows up, that we don't go all the way to the end of the scale. We're going to hang around somewhere around 120 beats per minute. And that's going to be where you're going to have peak performance without all the negative impacts of stress. Now, something else I want to cover really quick is there's a relationship between something that happens to people after the event, and that's called PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress. There's a lot of science around this. We're not going to get too into it, but there are really 3 factors that affect PTSD or PTS, and those are fear, helplessness, and horror. So that could be, you have a natural disaster happening. What will happen to a lot of people is their heart rate's going to go up. They're going to get that sick feeling in their stomach, right? That's the adrenaline dump. And then they're going to start to feel lightheaded. That's vasoconstriction. So there's a lot of different things that happen. The way that you combat these things are using a couple of techniques. So one of the techniques when it's happening is you are breathing. So when we're on the range and Nate is trying to shoot, he's going to be breathing as much as he can. He'll do it unconsciously when he's actually shooting, but when he's finished an actual exercise or a shoot command, he's going to take a great big deep breath. He's going to take his eyes off the target. He's going to look around. We call that scanning. And what that does is it breaks that tunnel vision. And it's really important. That's why we'll be like, finish what you're doing, take a deep breath, and take a look around. Flip your firearm on safe. It's not a habit we're trying to do to keep him oxygenated. It's a habit that we're doing that it breaks that stress. It puts more oxygen into his bloodstream, which tells his heart you don't have to beat as hard, which lowers his heart rate, and you're breaking that tunnel vision.
In terms of the difference between the forebrain and the midbrain, that PTSD becomes baked into the midbrain experience. This event, this incident, which gets baked into your brain, and then every time you're in a similar situation, you kind of go back to that space where you were. And so it takes a lot of grounding techniques. You talked about breathing, which is a good one. Lower that heart rate a little bit.
Now, when it comes to after you've done whatever you had to do, so after the earthquake or whatever, when you're starting to suffer that PTSD, those 3 factors, fear, helplessness, and horror. Well, how can we tackle those things before they happen? And that's one of the most important parts of all this. The fear and the helplessness can be overcome by training. It can also be overcome by you taking the time to visualize critical situations and the multitude of ways that you could have reacted to that. And the helplessness is important. If you have prior training, you already know what to do, you won't feel as helpless. So if you can take all three of those things down by working in your mind and also working training-wise, you'll reduce the effect that they have when something bad happens, and you'll have a good shot at reducing the trauma that you'll be experiencing after. So this is why this stuff is really important to training, and you'll see that it's incorporated in all the drills that we're gonna do.
And I think there's an importance too in randomizing these drills that we're gonna do and making it as unexpected as possible so it doesn't become too monotonous, because you do want to try to have this be generalized. It says you don't know what the situation is gonna be, but I think just the idea of getting comfortable with stress, right? And being able to manage it can transfer to all kinds of situations, right?
I'm not a huge fan of buzz terms, but I'll screw up the term or the saying, but the first time that you need to do something shouldn't be the first time that you're doing it. You'll always respond better if you've done it several times or hundreds of times. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Perfect. All right, guys, so now that we've talked about some of the core principles related to this stuff, we're gonna go and put it into practice on the range in the next few videos. So make sure you come back and check those out. Don't forget, this video was sponsored by the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.